Hello, world. My name is Mike Caliso. I'm coming from Wellington, New Zealand, and welcome to our PaNZIT podcast or video live. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so that you can get updated episodes every time we upload new episodes. So this episode basically is the start of our 3, maybe 4 public cloud series. And today, Joseph and I will talk to my personal friend and also a co-worker sometime, Mr. Paul Dunlop. Paul is also based here in Wellington and currently hold a title of National AWS Lead for Datacom New Zealand. And also an AWS Ambassador. But we will give him a chance to introduce himself later. And hello, Joseph. Batiin mo naman yung viewers and listeners natin.
Yes, hello. Good day, world. Is that maayong buntag or maayong gabi sa inyong tanan? And welcome to our, I think this is probably the 4th episode, but thank you to this cloud series, Mike. And I think a lot of people will be interested and will benefit from this cloud series. So watch out for this episode and the next ones.
Yeah, sure. And how are you today, Paul? You can greet them in Ilonggo or Bisaya, mate.
Bisaya. Maayo, salamat. Mayong gabi. Kumusta?
There you go.
Good stuff, Paul.
Yeah.
Very good.
So Paul, you're based here in Wellington. I'm not sure if you grow here in Wellington as well, or you moved from. Are you based in Wellington? What is
I was originally born in Wanganui.
Wanganui.
All right.
It's quite a nice place over there. Eh?
Yeah, it was a really nice town to grow up into. It was, nice.
So how long have you been in Wellington?
Well, I first moved down when I was about 20, and I stayed for about 11 years, and then I rocked over to Australia for about 7 years, and then I've been back.
That explains it, Mike. I don't quite hear that Kiwi accent, you know.
I know. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, but yeah, born and bred Kiwi. So we have Paul that's going to talk to us and give us his insights about AWS. But I mentioned earlier, I want you to introduce yourself. So I think you better do it yourself and not us telling you what you are doing and what you do, what you do in your downtime. What keeps you busy? What are your hobbies? What are the exciting things that you are doing these days, really?
Yeah, cool. Firstly, can I just say, nice job on setting up the podcast, guys. It's really pleasing to see someone taking the effort to do this. And you're doing a great job. Love your work so far. Really good. And it's happy to be here to have a chat with you. So thanks for inviting me. What's keeping me busy these days is a new job, really. The National AWS Technology Lead and Datacom's got me going pretty full time. I've only been in that role for about 8 weeks. I'll talk more about that later. Where I've come from, I've had a long career in IT these days. So I've been around for 25 plus years easily now. So I kind of have a family, and so what keeps me busy these days is also my family, and that's pretty much what was making me excited about my weekends is to spend time with my 2 girls. So I sort of try and make sure that I've got a decent work-life balance these days as a result of having a family, right? So
that's right.
Yeah. I'm may not look it, but I'm 47 years of age.
Really?
Yeah. And I've been working with computers since I was about 8 and a half. So it's been a long time. My journey started on an Apple IIe. Back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to sort of learn computing as it's evolved through home computing itself, right?
True. That's right.
I think I know what the fountain of youth is, Paul. I think it's the Filipino wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that conversation actually, Paul. Maybe you can introduce a little bit about your family as well. You mentioned you have 2 girls. and you're married to a Filipino wife who is, keeping you younger these days. So what are the other things that you do Filipino for our Filipino listeners?
Jeez, a little bit about my Filipino background. My wife comes from Mindanao. She comes from a city called Iligan. I've had the pleasure of going to the Philippines 5 times. I actually met her online when I was living in Australia. And it was pretty much love at first sight, really. Went over there and in between contracting gigs and met her, and within 5 days was asking for her father's blessing to get married.
Yeah, you need to do that. You need to do that.
That's important.
That was a bit of fun. That was an interesting day where the whole family flocked around for dinner. And it was very, impatient about me asking, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? It was like kind of nerve-wracking. It wasn't just with the dad. It was a room full of, about 12
the
people.
whole Filipino family. Yeah, exactly.
The entire clan, basically.
Yeah,
because I was practicing how to say it in Visaya, right? I don't remember fully how to say it, but because I was doing all the girls were all sort of giggling in the corner at the time that I was practicing to ask for the blessing. It was all a bit of a thing. And then I went over. The other thing I noticed, I went back in because I met her in May, and then I went back in October for a what do they call it? It was a marriage counselling session, if you will. Like they brought everyone together who was getting married with foreigners to have a session. Because I know you've already touched about this in the past, but the Filipino government is really good at keeping the Filipino people safe. And so the session was around ensuring that the ladies who were marrying foreign men understood what they were getting into, for lack of a better way to say
safety,
it.
Really,
The adjustments and the cultural adjustments and all that.
Because it won't be the same, and sometimes men like to do the finances instead of the woman, and because I understand that's a big thing in the Philippines is that the ladies look after money.
Look at me.
So you just be prepared for the culture differences, and also that there's a safety net for you if you get in trouble with men and all that sort of stuff. So that was good. It was an eye-opener in the sense that the country looks after their people nicely, so that was good. And then I got married in the Philippines in 2009. Had 130 people turn up, and it was a really good wedding. I've organised only for 100, so you know how it works out.
You invite one family member, you bring the whole clan, basically. It
was awesome. I loved it. And I got introduced into Tanduay and Red Horse.
What's your favorite pulutan, Paul? Favorite
pulutan?
Yeah, you know what pulutan is?
Food. When you drink, you need to have some, adobo maybe.
Definitely pork adobo is high up there. Pork lempo even better.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, I'm imagining that now.
And I enjoy a good lechon baboy as well.
Of course.
Of course.
Can't not have that. And then the desserts, I'm into, I can bake brasso de Mercedes.
Yes.
And
brasso de Mercedes.
And leche flan. Wow. Leche flan is good.
Wow. It's all up there.
You know your Filipino food, man.
You do. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And shakoy. Have you had shakoy?
Oh, that's a illegal
twisted donut.
Twisted donut.
And you pour it with a lot of sugar. That's basically
sugar coating.
It's a bad one to have. So I got my wife into Australia after a year of being apart because I had to prove the marriage and all that sort of jazz. And then we stayed there for about 4 years and had our first kid over there, who was, interestingly enough, born stateless. Because I'm, as a New Zealand citizen living in Australia, you're not accorded the rights to grant citizenship to your children. And my wife at the time was on a New Zealand family visa, and so she wasn't either able. So I ended up getting my firstborn citizenship by descent. And then we moved back to New Zealand, and since then my wife's been treated a little bit better by our government, which is great news.
That's right.
Way better. It was one of the reasons why we moved back, actually. And then I've had my second daughter in May of 2014.
And you're planning for a third one, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
It's our conversation.
The more the merrier.
Anyway, I think we segued too much. So Yeah, you talk about your current job. You talk
Yeah.
about your a little bit of your career journey, and you talk about your Filipino family and those awesome Filipino food. Now, can you tell us more about your current job and how your day looks like being a national technical AWS lead for a biggest service provider datacom in New
Yeah.
Zealand?
My role is around helping build the AWS business line and business practice and enabling the wider organization to execute on AWS services. So I'm either handling the sales pipeline, helping shape up opportunities, talking to customers about their problems, looking at ways that AWS can solve those problems. I'm working with the delivery teams that work on projects, which can come in many different forms. So that could be just like migrations from data centers, or maybe rewriting applications to be more cloud native. And just sort of positioning AWS services more appropriately. And then also assisting with the once all the projects have delivered, how they will be operated and run in the cloud, right? So, and alongside that, there's an undercurrent of shrink wrapping business product and services, so that it's easier to sell it essentially and to manage it, and that we've got standards rather than doing everything differently. We try and apply some kind of lens that's consistent across the estates.
Correct.
Yeah, because otherwise you burn your operations staff out. They've got to learn too many things. And so we've got some product development environments that we need to have more teams that actually are working on that. So I help sort of focus that and make sure the architecture is right and that all the collateral is being built correctly.
So that sounds like a really big call as well, Paul.
Yeah.
Not just busy, but really big call for you to be the national, not really ambassador, but the national lead for AWS. But probably let's try to go back a bit, right? So you mentioned before that you've been in the tech industry for how many decades and how many years, and but what do you make out of the tech scene nowadays? Like, how has it changed over the last 2 decades? Like I used to work with legacy stuff, right? Legacy data centers, virtualizations, and now cloud computing. What do you make of all these?
That's a pretty loaded question, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're in another wave of technology, is the short answer, right? I've, through my career, had to reskill countless times because of the change in the technology stack, right? And we're in pretty much a new wave right now. The last wave, you could argue, was VMware. It was virtualizing servers on one single piece of hardware to allow multiple machines to run. That was in the data center. And now we're looking at a technology stack that's often people say is another person's data center. And sort of, they're kind of right, but really what those vendors have done with their data centers is to create a new software fabric that you can wield in a new way.
That's right.
It's quite empowering, right? So there's still an aspect of legacy involved in there. You're not discarding everything that you ever learned. So, backup's still a conversation, monitoring still a conversation, data's a conversation. But there's a new emerging trends around artificial intelligence and Internet of Things.
That's right.
Really exciting.
No, I think that was spot on. That was really what I wanted to hear. You touch a bit on how cloud computing is now as compared to virtualization, right? And you've explained it well for those people who doesn't have any idea yet. Because as you know, a lot of the IT professionals out there might have no idea what cloud really is at the background. And I think that's really good. And maybe you can tell us more about AWS and why do you think there is a big adoption, well, not just here in New Zealand, but also across the globe. I know AWS is pretty popular in the Philippines as well.
I think probably if you wind it back to how AWS came about as an interesting story in and of itself, right? So Amazon was a bookstore, and it was a web-based bookstore. So it had the monolithic tiered architecture where you had a web server, an application server, and a database server. But they also had millions of people around the planet hitting their website every second. And that kind of technology stack didn't scale effectively at all and was costing a lot of money. And they had to reimagine their own back-end infrastructure to handle that. So through their own engineering capabilities, they came up with the idea about essentially microservicing all of their platform and allowing it to be something called elastic.
Scalable.
Scalable. Breathe in and out as demand and your users, the load of your users dictated. And then along that journey, they decided, why don't we make this a service for other people? Because we can't just be the only website that exists on the planet. Other people.
That's right. Yeah.
So how about we actually start making this accessible to others? And the original, AWS about 12 years ago was really just a storage and compute environment only, with a modicum of networking. And the initial APIs that you would call to allow you to build with it. So that
compute,
so then I believe they, as a result of having that direction and instilling that capability in their environment, became one of the pioneers of the platform microservice landscape, right? So something that fronted through programmatic calls the ability to build a server or an infrastructure or a database. You could call it programmatically, which wasn't really well understood in the data centers. There's a little bit of it going on in the data centers, but it wasn't. No one had really captured that market properly until AWS came along. I think the other thing that I think people really like about AWS is that when they were engineering what this would look like, they cared about security right from the start. So their identity and access management controls were very carefully orchestrated into how you would leverage the microservice. And so their identity with access policies and their role management is embedded everywhere. And it can be as granular as you want it to be. It makes it as pure as you want it to be. Also, it's complex. With that kind of granularity comes complexity, but it's really powerful when you wield it correctly. And so by having that embedded at the start, you feel confident that you can do things securely by default, which is great. And then having the programmatic access there allows you to automate things more effectively. So when I first learned AWS and I started seeing CloudFormation,
absolutely,
which is that's their infrastructure as code engine. So instead of buying a piece of hardware and having to rack it and install an operating system on it, I can define that piece of hardware in a text file. And just to define its attributes and parameters, and then I feed it into an engine, and the engine goes and reads that definition, and then it goes and builds it virtually for me, right? And it wasn't just a server that I was able to build. I was able to build the network and the route table and the subnets and the load balancer, and all of a sudden, what used to take months to get done and involve multiple teams and have change controls, and maybe I need to spend 500 grand on an F5 and spend 3 months waiting for it to be turned up and then go into a data center and manage it. It was like an hour's worth of effort to write it in a text file and then 5 minutes for it to execute the build of it. And what do you know? Now I've got a load balance. So I was like completely blown away with how empowered I felt again to innovate at speed by that technology stack. And that really excited me. And I think that excites a lot of people about cloud as a result, and that the power at your fingertips enables you to rapidly innovate and go to market now as a company and be more competitive as a result.
That's awesome, Paul. And you really explain the value of flexibility by codifying actions that systems admin and developer do manually to create an application using that code, which really encourage standardization as well, right? And collaboration, because you can work together in that text file, for example. Now, with the power of this flexibility and able to to reimagine the way you deploy application in the cloud. Because it's easy. There is also this concept that I was really interested about cloud waste and how a customer should manage the cloud waste, especially if they are rapidly or expanding the usage of public cloud such as AWS. What is your opinion about this, being in your role, who is like creating a roadmap for a company like Datacom?
So what do you mean by cloud waste? Isn't that like I create a resource and then it just sits around and I should have cleaned it up?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
well, okay, I
it's
have a
an
very strong
economy.
opinion about that.
Yeah, it's an economy that it really created because of the unmanaged resources that a public cloud, for example, can.
Yeah, so I mean, you give the ability for people to create so quickly and nimbly, then you also they can create a mess just as fast, right?
Yep. Exactly. That's where I'm
totally.
Yeah.
So, and that's part of the reason why I like CloudFormation, for example, is if you dictate that people shouldn't use the console, the AWS web interface, and they should talk to AWS programmatically or using infrastructure as code, then it's relatively easy to clean up after yourself. A CloudFormation stack, you can just right click and say delete, and then everything that was created with it is deleted. But someone who goes in through the console and starts clicking manually, you've got to remember what you built.
Exactly.
That can be a problem. So I like to describe AWS as not being the web interface, because a lot of people get confused to think that it is. It's actually, all it is it's a massive engine of APIs. And their web interface is really just one version of a web interface that can exist in front of it to drive it. You could write your own if you wanted to. In fact, Netflix did with a product called Asgard at one point. So really the best way that you can interact with the cloud is programmatically, in my opinion, using standard infrastructure as code. And that will allow you to keep an inventory of what it is that you've built and effectively clean up after yourself. And the other aspect will be to programmatically keep the environment with some kind of compliance checks and guardrails around it, right? So that it continually monitors itself as well, and lets you know when things have deviated from the norm or have been hanging around too long or have become orphaned from something, right? So there's an aspect of you do have to manage and operate the environment, but even in saying that, there was a topic that came out around invisible ops. You don't, if you set up, the operations teams learn how to program and set up event-driven controls in the cloud, which is a real key topic, by the way. Event-driven.
The AI and ML. That is another topic for another episode.
If they do that, then the environment monitors itself also. So then your operations team become invisible in essence, right?
Correct.
A really good thing to keep on top of.
So the concept of no-touch deployment and AI-driven infrastructure is what the concept is really going into.
And that's right. CI/CD and code pipelines, because CloudFormation can actually create the CloudFormation stack, which is the entity that ends up in the console with all the resources hanging off the back of it that's built, the servers and the load balancers and whatnot. That stack entity can be created by another AWS product called Code Deploy that can build infrastructure as a result. It's not just deploying code, which is in its name. Inherently, Code Deploy was there to distribute code to servers, web application code or WAR files, jar files, whatever, right, to servers. But this puppy is now designed to actually build CloudFormation stacks, which essentially lets you create anything. And so you can hook up a code pipeline to a code repository where your infrastructure as code sits, and then you've got the no touch that you're talking about, right? And you can build using that mechanism. And that'll help you lower down waste effectively, right?
That's right.
That's one way to do it.
Right. So we talk about the AWS adoption. That is happening widely, and I'm sure it's also happening in government and private enterprise. So with hundreds of features of AWS that are widely used, what are the main features do you think that our listeners should really understand by heart for them to be successful in this new wave of adoption of public cloud, specifically in the AWS?
Well, I think without a doubt, you got to learn IAM. AWS is IAM, right? That's core. It allows you to make sure that what you're doing is secure. Then, I mean, it's a little tricky question, because it kind of depends on the nature of your role and what it is that you're going to be doing for a job. But I'd probably sum it up as understand some of the DevOps tooling. Regardless of whether you're a developer or an infrastructure person, you're probably going to need to know Git now. You're going to need to know an IDE. So if you're not aware of those, go and learn those. Learn how to put code into a code repository and branch it. And then I personally am strong on the fact that I believe infrastructure should be pushed out through pipelines. So learn how pipelining works in whichever form. So code pipeline, code build, code deploy, cloud formation is really key, identity and access management, in the very least. And then the rest sort of follows down the path of what is this that I'm doing today? Am I building a server, or am I building a serverless web application?
Right.
And then that'll be where the different services start to play a bit more for you.
Hey Paul, I really love the bit when you shared about the history of AWS coming from a shopping website to what it is right now, right? And as we all know, because of that innovation that AWS brought, there's been a lot of competitors: Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Alibaba, and IBM Cloud. What do you think, at least in your perspective, differentiates AWS apart from all the other cloud providers? Because I know there are a lot of similarities, right?
It's a good question in 2021.
Because there's a lot of cloud providers out there right now. Well, I know you are the pioneers, and I mean AWS is the pioneer, so that's really great.
And I think, well, that is a key point. And it's not just that they were pioneers; they continue to be pioneers.
Exactly.
They are rapidly innovating constantly, bringing out new products, new services, enhancing old products, and they do that by listening to their customers. So they're constantly asking and surveying their customer landscape, going, what's the next pain point that you've got that we can solve for you, right? And that's where a lot of their product sets are coming about. So I think, being a set of builders and having the customer's focus in mind and constantly staying at day zero are their key points of being able to keep ahead of the competition.
And innovating towards whatever the customer needs nowadays, because it's constantly evolving. I think that's really good, Mike.
That's awesome. And I think, I agree with you on that, Paul. Now, there is one other question that I really want to ask, because I am I've been trying to understand this as well. So, and I have my own opinion when it comes to hybrid cloud or multi-cloud adoption for customer. What is your opinion about this patterns of adoption?
I see a hybrid cloud sticking around for a little while. My personal opinion is that there was some kind of holy trinity happening anyway with the on-premise system, AWS, and Office 365. I felt that Office 365 doesn't really have a challenger in the marketplace today, and so most organizations were just going to adopt it anyway, right? Off the back of Office 365 is another product that AWS has been keenly developing, Microsoft have been keenly developing, called Azure AD, which is essentially has become an identity as a service and a federator for identity, and I felt that organizations were probably going to use that in earnest too. So the way that I architect for the cloud is always, as a result, a combination of having that as my landscape. That my customer is likely to have an on-premise environment, likely to have Office 365 and some other cloud, including preferably AWS, really. For me, it's the most mature cloud.
Go ahead, Paul.
Sorry, so then the next thing around that for me was, how do I integrate those from a network perspective, right? And so that's been an interesting one to watch also, where there's been a company called Megaport spring out, and what they've done is
I'm very aware.
They've created a network as a service software fabric essentially for networking that hasn't really been done before either. And for me, that their cloud router would hook Azure and AWS as a backbone together without having to trombone down onto the on-premise and do all sorts of fancy stuff. So I think for me, I think hybrids is around for a while, and we should cater for it, and we should look at using those, like the Megaport tooling, more effectively to hook in those three correctly.
Yeah, and there are this what you call this government mandate, for example, here in New Zealand that you cannot bring your data outside New Zealand. So that
That's a
calls
new
for a
one.
hybrid. Yeah.
That's such a complex conversation, right? I mean, there's there's only a few government agencies really that actually have to have data sovereignty 100% embedded in their core, and that's due to Maori data sovereignty.
Right.
And there have been mechanisms around trying to work around that in the past. But then more recently, Parliamentary Services, I think, in New Zealand put a halt on their Office 365 implementation because of certain laws in Australia that basically meant that there was a backdoor to New Zealand data, and they weren't happy with that.
Interesting.
So it wasn't really even a sovereignty issue. It started to become what the other government agencies' reach could be.
Yeah.
It becomes political. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's good to see that the cloud vendors are starting to take that seriously and maybe putting a presence into New Zealand so that we can try and resolve those issues.
Yep. Yeah. So that's really good, and we can talk more about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. But I'm just conscious about the time here. So another thing that I really want to ask is career advice. For is an important thing, especially looking at how you progress your career. So I think our listeners will want to know, what is your career advice for the people that is listening, including me and Joseph here, to actually progress the career of your choice. What are the things that Paul? What is your X factor, for example, and can you share that to our listeners?
That's my X factor. Well, obviously, being so cloud centric, it has to be certification in cloud. Is the short answer, right? I think if someone rocked up to me today and said, I want to get into IT, what should I focus on? I would be saying you either need to get certified in AWS or get certified in Azure. But then in so saying, there's still a general IT concepts need to be understood still, right? An operating system still plays a part in the landscape of the cloud. So maybe understanding some Linux and some Windows isn't such a bad thing either, right? And so I tend to say start with for AWS, you start with Cloud Practitioner, which gives you the general introduction to what cloud paradigm is, because it is a paradigm shift. And then the Solution Architect Associate's a generalist exam, which is really good to have. And that teaches you about the compute, the data storage, the databases that are products in general in AWS, and some of the web services like CloudFront that are useful to know. And then depending on the person in front of me, if they were a developer, I might suggest that they might want to go and do the developer associate and then seek to move into the professional certs. I would strongly urge people to get professionally certified because it's such a strong certificate to have to show people that you really know what you're talking about and you deserve a job. And then AWS have evolved their certification over time to have speciality certs too. So you might be more interested in doing something with artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's a cert for that too, and that would be a good one to have a look at. I mean, I constantly tell people rather that when it comes to cloud these days, it's no longer a learning curve. The curve is now bent so far back on itself that it's a learning.
Definitely.
That's true. I like that statement, Paul.
And
you will not stop learning.
Yes, you do. And speaking of learning, those certifications, Paul, how accessible are them? Like, for example, as an AWS ambassador, how would you recommend them to seek out materials out there from AWS, perhaps, and do the certifications from there?
You could go to my blog site.
There you go. That's the answer.
Yeah.
I got a link on my blog site for the training, all the different training things that I'd send people off to, and there's a couple of free places that you can go to start your journey on learning.
Nice, that's right.
But the exams themselves do cost a little bit of money, so if you can try and sort of get your current employer to help fund it, that's always a good idea.
That's right. It's always a good idea.
Don't worry, to our listeners, we will post Paul's
link
blog site on the link below, so that should be available to you guys.
That's right.
But nevertheless, Paul, Paul, we really had a good time, and we really learned a lot from you, especially on the history of cloud and AWS in general, which is fantastic because it's those challenges gives us innovation, right? Hope you had a good time as well. So it's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
All
Maraming
right.
salamat.
For having me.
Daghang salamat. Daghang salamat.
Well,
Yeah, there you go.
just any last few words to all our Filipino viewers out there. Well, not just the Filipino viewers, but all our viewers and listeners out there, Paul.
I'd say don't be discouraged. It might seem a little daunting up front doing a cloud journey, but it is a journey, and you should take one step at a time. It's an exciting one. Innovation is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Innovation is a lot of fun. No better word just to end this podcast with Paul Dunlop. Thank you very much again. And Mike, thank you again to all our listeners. Hopefully you'll listen to the next episode on this cloud series. And again, thank you very much to Paul Dunlop for all the knowledge that you shared with us. This is really helpful to all our listeners. Thank you very much. And to
we'll have a coffee. We'll have a coffee again next week.
For another beer. All right, everyone. Have a good one. Catch you on the next episode. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.